Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast. This be episode number 449. We're kicking off today. Jacob and I reunited after some time anyway. I'm glad to have my main bro doing the podcast with me today.
Dude, it sounds like a romance film. Like I don't know, it's getting awkward.
Well, 450 episodes dang near. You know, there ought to be something to account for with that in our relationship.
Okay, that's fair. That's valid. But it's I just don't want to get the wrong idea, you know? Over the weekend, I did say something to the effect of, I need to discuss that with my partner. And then I realized that I'd left out the word business. And I was like, oh, crap.
That's not the first time that's happened.
Partner. So, anyway.
Yeah. Well, hey, got a good crew checking in. Thank you, Ken, Bobby, and Gordon so far. North Carolina and Ohio represented so far. Very cool, very cool. We're going to talk about a topic today that I did in a shop talk previously, but I think it's podcast worthy material, so we're going to do it. Plus, I've had personally some additional insights, probably even in the last couple of weeks, if I'm being honest. And so, yeah. Plus, Jacob's perspective, I think, on the topic today will be interesting. And I'm going to throw it back your way at some point, Jacob. And I'm going to ask you what's also the one thing that's made a difference for you in your shooting, because we're all at different places, right, with our shooting. So, yeah, it should be an interesting episode.
I do have an idea for that, something that recently has made a big difference.
Good. Cool. Well, that'll be fun. Well, let's start the recorded audio, I guess, portion of the show. And so we will do that with a 3, 2, 1. This is the Concealed Carry Podcast, episode number 449. And welcome to the Concealed Carry Podcast, part of the concealedcarry.com network. I am your host, Riley Bowman, and I'm joined today by my old buddy, Jacob Paulsen.
Thanks, Riley.
You know, saying things like that, I know puts a smile on your face, and thus it puts a smile on mine. And, you know, the world goes round. Win-win all the way around.
I don't know how to feel about that, because there's a competition in our warehouse I've noticed recently, unbeknownst to me, where they try and say things to get me to smile. Because they'll say something like they'll say something and I'll smile, and then one of them will say to the other, like, "You see that? I got him to smile." And it's happened several times. So apparently I am the Grinch of concealedcarry.com.
Yeah, well, yeah. I've tried to be a little more upbeat as of late in the warehouse, because I've been a bit of a Grinch, a grump, because I'm tired of like working in the new office remodel. So I've been trying to put a smile on my face more and more as well. I know that probably sounds like a surprise to some people, but even Jacob knows this. I get grumpy sometimes.
It's true. And I'm just boring and emotionless, generally speaking.
Today's episode is, well, almost episode 450. And this is almost a 450th episode worthy topic, I feel. But instead, it is episode 449. Actually, we were going to have with us on today's episode, it was going to be a totally different podcast episode. It was going to be with a guest, Brian Conley from Hunters HD Gold. We were talking about some like vision and eye pro kind of, eye protection related stuff with Brian. And unfortunately, he had to reschedule. And so it looks like we're going to have him back on next Tuesday. for the podcast. So just a heads up there. Looking forward to what I think will be an interesting episode with Brian Conley from Hunter's HD Gold. So Jacob and I kind of, really, I guess I'm the one that threw out the idea, but we had to scramble, put together a different episode for today. And so we're going to talk about the one thing that's made all the difference in our shooting, meaning shooting skills or the actual act of shooting a gun. Shooting skills are shooting skills. And, we're not talking about tactics or defensive stuff necessarily today. We're just talking about running your gun. And, in the last few weeks, and certainly in the last few months, and in the last year or two, it's this constant evolution, at least for me, of trying to discover more of who I am as a shooter and continually level up, trying to get to that next level, whatever that is. It just means I'm pursuing excellence as a shooter. Jacob, I know you don't tackle it quite with the gusto that I do, but I know you care about being as good a shooter as you can be. So we'll break down this idea today of what's the one thing that's made a lot of difference for us. Today's episode, brought to you by the Cool Fire Trainer. We are proud dealers of Cool Fire Trainer. We've been selling it now for a couple of months on our website. Actually, since just shortly after SHOT Show, I think is when we got things rolling with Cool Fire Trainer. I don't know whether you were aware of that, but I think the Cool Fire Trainer is a unique training device. It does something that nothing else does, and that is allows you to train with a resetting trigger on your pistol with recoil action. And it's through the clever use of some pistons and other fancy stuff. You replace the barrel and recoil spring in your gun, and away you go. Cool Fire Trainer, I'm going to make some connections back to it once we get a little bit deeper into our topic today, as I talk about the one thing that's made all the difference for me as a shooter. And the Cool Fire Trainer has a lot to do. It has a lot to do with, especially in this day and age where, Jacob's got one there. He's holding it up. In this day and age where ammo is so difficult to come by and is expensive, this type of dry fire training tool becomes even more valuable. Guys, going over to concealedcarry.com/coolfire. That is COOLFIRE. Concealedcarry.com/coolfire, and pick up a Cool Fire Trainer today. Jacob's got one for his Glock 19, and I also have one for Glock 19. I need to get one. I've said this before, but I really got to get one for my SIGs now, especially for my competition use. So, there's Jacob assembling it. That's how simple it can be. In just about a minute or less, you can take apart your live gun and assemble your Cool Fire Trainer and charge it up. And let's hear some shots there. Yeah. Cool. There you go. So, let's get into it, Jacob. What's the one thing that's made all the difference for us as shooters? And I'm trying to decide how to come at this, but I think the thing that we need to, as far as like lay groundwork wise, is the perspective that I have in mind for this episode today is we're not talking about grip or trigger control, or at least I'm not. I don't know, Jacob, you might have some other, ideas there, but I'm talking above and beyond the basic fundamentals, as they are commonly referred to, of shooting. I'm making the assumption that you've already got grip pretty well figured out, that your recoil management as a result of that is pretty sound. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you've got pretty decent mechanics, that your trigger manipulation is good enough to make, good, consistent shots on pretty much any of the targets that we would expect you to be able to make particularly with like a defensive context in mind, meaning that if you can reliably get zone hits on a USPSA target at 25 yards, and also people are like 25 yards, that's beyond a gunfight. If you can get reliable hits on an A zone target at 25 yards, I mean, it's not that hard to do. I could spend a couple hours with a newer shooter on the range, and we can get reliable hits on an A zone of 25 yards in really no time at all. So if you can do that consistently, that's the assumption I'm making. So you're at a point where your fundamental skill is pretty well there, but maybe you're struggling with how to, or even where to get, like what's the next thing for you? That's kind of my approach on this episode today, Jacob.
Okay. That mostly didn't make any sense to me, but we're going to find out what in the world you're talking about.
Well, again, the idea is that I made the assumption that we're not, your grip and your trigger control and all that is pretty much already pretty decent. You've got basic stuff.
I got that. Where I'm lost is that you have this one thing that has made all the difference for you, but it's not a shooting skill. So there's one thing Riley's done that's made all the difference in his shooting skills, but it has nothing to do with shooting skills, and that's where you lost me. But we're gonna find out.
That's not what I said at all.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying we're not talking about those common fundamentals. I mean, it ties into those things, okay, particularly with, well, all right, so should we just get into it? I mean, I'm bearing the lead, I know.
You're bearing the lead quite a bit.
I can't give away all the marbles right from the get-go.
or you could give away the marbles from the get-go. I suppose that's your prerogative.
How about before I give away my marbles, you give away your marbles? You said that recently, sure, even that there's been something that's made a difference for you in your shooting.
Yeah. I remember there's that whole thing of like incompetence and competent, whatever. It's like knowing what you don't know, not knowing what you don't know. And like all, whatever, like, I can't remember how it flows, but I generally live in that
Dunning-Kruger effect is what you're referring to.
Yeah. I generally, with my shooting, live in a world where I know what I don't know, where I'm pretty clear on where my weaknesses are. I just fail to work hard enough to improve or mitigate them. So that's kind of the Jacob summary. So I know that really to improve my shooting skills significantly, my number one thing is a combination of, however you want to think of it, grip and trigger work. I say combination of because theoretically I could just get really good on the trigger and that would compensate for a crappy grip. But I'm more likely to succeed if I just get really good with my grip, and that compensates for slapping the trigger. So those are the things I know I need to work best at. But with that said, here's the big thing for me recently, and it's simply trying to reset the trigger during recoil. That's the current big thing for Jacob right now. And I think this is a big thing for a lot of people. If I'm shooting quickly, if I know that I'm shooting quickly, then I just slap the trigger. I just pop. The problem is that two things. One is I lose a lot of control in doing that. And if I don't have a really good lockdown grip, then that's accentuated. The other thing that's happening is it slows down the speed at which I can shoot pretty considerably, because I'm pressing that trigger and then resetting it, and then pressing the trigger and then resetting it, and so there's just this great lost period of time. And I didn't really ever like consciously realize the sequence in which those events were happening until I was on the range this last weekend. And I was on the range, and we were doing a drill specifically oriented around this kind of topic. And the idea was, it was all about follow through. I think that's how the instructor worded it. And the instructor said, come up on target, press off a shot, and then acquire another sight picture and prep the trigger to the wall immediately so that you're ready to go with the second shot. But don't take the second shot. At that point, just wait for my command. And this was done with various, repetitions and with varying different commands after a person had fired the first shot, right? So come up on target, bang, acquire sight picture, prep trigger to the wall, and then wait. And then maybe the instructor would say, okay, shoot a second shot. Or maybe the instructor would say, okay, go ahead and divorce from that trigger and reholster, or some sort of command. So I thought, yep, got it. Know what to do. No problem, right? And so I come up on target. I squeeze off that first shot. And then I hear the person next to me who's running a Glock, and I'm also running a Glock at this moment. The person next to me, I hear the click of the reset. Click. And I think to myself, oh, they shot, had recoil, came up, acquired a second sight picture, and then reset their trigger. How pathetically embarrassing of them to have waited so long to reset their trigger. You know what happened in that moment? I realized I still had my trigger trapped to the rear. And so then I let it out and heard my click. And I was super embarrassed. I was like, oh my gosh, like I was condemning this person next to me for being so slow to reset the trigger, and I didn't reset it at all. I had trapped the trigger, if for lack of a better term. I think everyone's probably following along just fine. So we did several more repetitions of this, and I just had this moment of clarity where I realized that if I know I'm only going to shoot one shot, I'm extremely deliberate, especially if I'm going for precision. I'm very deliberate about my trigger press, the way I work through the wall to try and create some good neural pathways for me. And because of that, I reset very deliberately or slowly. I mean, it's still subconscious, but it comes after that moment. And if I'm shooting multiple shots, if I know I'm going to shoot multiple shots, hey, run a bill drill, come from the holster, come up on target, bang, 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 bang. Then I'm resetting the trigger, but I still do it after recoil. I still press trigger, get recoil, reset trigger, and fire. And that happens relatively quickly, but that's still the sequence. And so I just had a moment of clarity where I realized that that's what I was doing. And so I've been, throughout the rest of that class, and since then in my dry fire and things, I've been really focused on reset during recoil. And this is an interesting thing because it's very difficult to train in dry fire. We're in an ammo shortage right now, and the large majority of us do most of our training via dry fire, at least, certainly myself. I know you, Riley, and many others who are listening to this. And so if the focus is on a dry fire, then certainly we can train to reset quickly, but you lack the recoil necessary to really, measure and feel and determine the idea that I'm resetting during the recoil. Right, that by the time I acquire a second sight picture, I'm ready to fire the next shot, and that's the difference for me. And so that's something that I guess is my latest thing, is resetting during recoil. And just to add a little bit to our sponsor message, the Cool Fire Trainer comes in really handy to that degree. So I have been running the Cool Fire Trainer more recently in the last couple of days since that course I took over the weekend, because it allows me to do that. It allows me to feel recoil, right? Come up on shot, up on target, press shot, and immediately prep that trigger to the wall for the next follow-up shot during the recoil. As it's recoiling, I'm already resetting the trigger and prepping to the wall, so that as soon as I have my sight picture back, I can go again. And as you like to say, Riley, shoot as fast as you can see the sights. The sights are the speedometer. So that's my current new one thing for Jacob. And as I finished that little speech, I realized we've lost Riley. The internet connection Riley's gone. So either the internet's down at the warehouse, or he's down or something, but he's gone. So that's kind of weird. I'm talking to myself. This is extremely awkward. For the 25 people who are watching this on Facebook and YouTube, I bet it's even more awkward. So that was the big thing for me, is figuring out, yes, I do need to get better at acquiring the grip better and locking it down, really, really well, and applying, having both strength and technique relative to grip and consistency. But I think further than that, I realized that I was failing to reset the trigger during recoil, and trying to learn how to do that has been my current one big thing. So while we wait for Riley, for those of you who are attending live, go to the comments and tell us, what is something you need to improve, right? So we talked a moment about competence or being aware or whatever. So for those of you paying attention right now, go to the comments and tell us, what is something in your shooting that you need to improve. So you've learned something, but you've not mastered that skill, and it is the current barrier to you progressing. So Randy says trigger pull. So Randy, I too know I need to work on trigger pull. And I can very consciously, while I'm shooting, Randy, right? I know I can, if I'm thinking about it, if I'm able to allow it into the cognitive stack, then I know I can come up on target, and I can mentally prep myself to, take out the slack of the trigger, come to the wall, right, and then work my way through that wall very gently, and get a really good shot and not have any issues with anticipation. The problem is if I'm distracted, if that falls out of my cognitive stack, then I know that I'm jerking the trigger, or I'm anticipating recoil, whatever anyone's saying here. And like you, Randy, I tend to shoot low and left. Mike says shooting with both eyes open is the thing he needs to work on right now. I was raised to shoot with two eyes open, Mike, so I don't have much advice on that other than I suppose just a matter of repetition, and I appreciate that. Mark says accuracy is something he needs to work on. So Mark, accuracy tends to be a function of having a good grip and a good sight picture and pressing the trigger properly. So I would encourage you to figure out which of those three things is the thing that's preventing you from being very accurate. Is that you're not gripping the gun well? Is it that you're not getting a good sight picture before you break the shot? Or is it that in the process of working the trigger, you're disturbing the gun and its alignment? Okay. Riley says he's working on getting his internet back up, so we'll be patient. Steve says sight picture. So, Steve, that's great insight. I think that's really important. I would offer two considerations if sight picture is the thing you're working on right now. One would be you might consider getting upgraded sights depending on the gun you're shooting and something like that. I know that certainly it's a lot easier for me. I've been able to shoot faster and acquire sight picture faster when I have good contrasting sights. In other words, like here's my Glock 19. And by default, Glock comes with black sights with white dots. The problem is that it makes it very different to contrast the white dot that's on the front sight from the dots on the rear sight, which means that getting really quick sight picture is more challenging for me. Whereas if you have contrasting, in the case that here I have some, these are high-vis sights, so they're green in the front and orange in the rear, then it's a lot easier to pick up green inside of orange. And I can do that much faster. I think the other thing is that getting good sight picture fast really comes down to grip. I mean, grip is the thing. It's the master that allows sight picture to happen quickly, because grip is what controls and manages recoil, so that I can keep the gun shooting flat and get a really good sight picture each time. So I think that if you're having a hard time getting a good sight picture quickly, consistently, grip is probably the next best thing to work on. Okay, let's see here. Curtis, same thing. Sight picture fast. Light 3102 asks a question. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Steve says being left eye dominant and right-handed. Steve, I'd encourage you just need to tweak your stance. Being left eye dominant and right-handed is only an issue really if you're blading your body while shooting. But if you square your chest, which is today the way all firearm instructors are teaching people to shoot, if you're squaring your chest to your target and extending both arms straight out, right, then that shouldn't be an issue, because it's an easy enough thing for me to just switch left eye and right eye without doing anything significant. Obviously, it still requires some repetition and figuring that out. So that's important. Stephen says dry fire enough to push the skills into the subconscious. Yeah, Tim, nothing replaces repetition, right? A question here from a viewer on YouTube. He says, which do you prefer, cool fire or CERT, if you can only have one for now? If you can only have one for now, I'd encourage you to get the CERT. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, cost is certainly variable. You have no ongoing cost with the CERT, so you don't have to constantly refill tanks like this one. CERT also, you don't have to stop and refill your gun. So in the case of this Glock 19 with a cool fire trainer, I can get about 15 shots before I have to recharge the air. And that doesn't allow for a lot of certain kinds of training. I certainly can't shoot 15 times and then perform a reload and go, because I'm out of air at that point. I got to stop, recharge the air, etc. The other challenge is that the cool fire trainer, while you can put a laser module on it, it's this guy right here. Every time you go to recharge the air, you got to unscrew the laser module. So it's a little bit frustrating sometimes, because put on laser module, do training, take laser module off, recharge, put it back on. So that can be a little bit frustrating. Whereas the cert, obviously, by nature, you get a laser every time you fire a shot. But that said, I think you need to have a cool fire trainer too. So that's my 2 cents about that one. Light3102 is your name. Riley, you've been missing some fun stuff here. So I got done with my long speech that you didn't get to hear. And
I caught a lot of it because I managed to, just pull up my cell phone, Facebook, and kind of heard a lot of what you laid down.
So you would have gotten the gist from the part you heard anyway.
Yeah, sorry about that, everybody. Internet went down hard and fast here, and resetting the router and all that. Well, it took a minute for everything to come back up finally. So here we are.
That's right. So I asked people to share in the comments if they know what is one thing that they need to work on, what's something they're aware that they're not very as proficient with as they need. And so I've been reading those and commenting on those. And here we are. We're kind of caught up.
Yeah, and amazingly too, just looking at the viewership numbers, that while I was away, viewership increased. So that's a sign that I should probably go away more often.
Yeah, we should test that in the future. Just have you drop out for like 5-10 minutes, see if we get an increase, and then have you come back.
See, I said a couple things and 4 people left. But anyway, okay, so so I mean, here's what I took from what you were saying, Jacob, is that and this is something I reiterate with those that I have instructed and even with myself, because occasionally I still catch myself pinning or trapping the trigger to the rear. It tends to happen more frequently with me when I am shooting really slowly. Okay, so you and I had a conversation yesterday about the use of the word slow. I tried to avoid the use of the word slow, but when we're making careful shots, deliberate shots, precise shots, that it tends to happen more with me in those situations. And it tends to happen more where I've already made kind of this decision, this predetermined decision that I'm shooting 6 shots, like say a bill drill, and I know I'm stopping on shot 6, and I'll notice occasionally I'll have my finger trapped to the rear or pinned to the rear in situations like that. So, and this is because it's been ingrained in me as a shooter since I was a little kid. That's how I was taught. That's a lot of us were taught. And in the words of Rob Latham, when I was in a bigger circle class last year, him and Mike Seeklander, he apologized profusely for screwing up an entire generation. He's like, our generation has screwed you all up. I apologize. What we taught for like 3 decades was wrong. Anyway, the thing with pinning the trigger to the reset after a shot's fired is what it ultimately means is your gun is not ready to be fired when your sights are back on target. And that's a pointless place to be. And I was listening to you as you were starting to describe like this experience you had. You noticed somebody else fired a shot and then you heard the click. And I was kind of listening to that whole thing. And you talked about, okay, the gun's fired, it cycles, the sights come back down on target. And that is literally what pinning the trigger to the rear is you have set yourself up to not be ready to fire the gun again when your sights are back on target.
Correct. Yeah. And if I know I'm shooting quickly, right? Like if I'm shooting a bill drill or something, I'm just cranking rounds, then clearly I'm not doing that, right? I'm not trapping it. Like I'm not consciously like resetting it. I'm just, the difference though in that moment is that I'm also not feeling myself through the wall. I'm just slapping that sucker as fast as I can. And the argument could be made, well, how bad is that? Well, it's debatable. But my grip is often not as awesome as it could be. So I know that if I have to make a very precise shot, I take up the slack and I work my way through that wall very carefully because that's also not a subconscious skill for me today. So I have to be very thoughtful in order to be precise. And in those moments when I'm trying to be precise, I trap the trigger, and then I notice I'm resetting it. Right, I know I'm like, oh, reset. And so what's clear is that I do not automatically, subconsciously today break a shot, and then reset the trigger during recoil. And that's the thing I want to do, right? I want to teach myself without any consideration that when I fire a shot, when I press a trigger, I reset it during recoil. That's what I do. That's what I need to do. That's what I should do. That's what I want to do. And not just reset it, but prep it for the second shot. And I may not have to take that second shot, but that's, I guess I'd never really thought about follow through that way. And we talk about follow through as a shooting skill. Some people do. And I've always been like, yeah, sure. That's, of course, duh. Right. But I guess I never tangibly thought about it to that degree before. And I realized that my follow through sucks. And part of it is because the way we train is we're attempting to perform a very specific string of fire. We know how many shots we're going to fire, right? And so when we're done, we're done. And, gun comes back. There was a student on the line with me who we were doing one-shot draws. And so, come up, bang, then come back in the holster. Come up, bang, come back in the holster. And then the command was given, for follow through, right? Break the shot and then reacquire sights. There was a shooter a couple down from in the line that could not do it. I mean, they would fire and then immediately come back to like a high compress ready, and they'd be like, "Oh crap, dang it!" And then they'd try again, and they'd come back. Like the muscle memory was so ingrained that my brain says, "I'm done shooting. Bring the gun back to the body now and get ready to reholster." That was so deep for that student that, like, with 4 or 5 repetitions, they kept doing the same mistake and they knew it. Like, that's how deep it was. And for me, it wasn't that deep. Like, I was able to follow the instructions, right? Reacquire the sight picture for a follow-up shot, but my finger was not resetting and prepping the trigger. And that was a huge failure I did not know I had.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let's be clear too, with regards to things in terms like follow through. Really, I mean, and I understand the context you were talking about, that in the class you were in, the instructor in particular wanted you to stay on target, and not get into this habit of break shot, snap gun back. Totally get that. But let's be clear, in the classical sense of the use of the words follow through, it really means to keep doing all the things you need to do to keep the gun on target until the bullet has left the muzzle of the gun, right?
Sure.
Well,
but the two are correlated.
Yes. But going back to the trigger manipulation thing and trigger reset, traditionally, like, that's how I was taught, was you need to follow through. You need to follow through that shot. So you break the shot, you pin the trigger to the rear, you let you let everything happen. Gun goes bang, slide cycles, recoil comes back, it snaps back forward, sights back down on target, see that second sight picture, and then finally now it's okay to go ahead and ease that trigger out till you get a click. That's been somehow roped into this definition of follow through, and that's the worst thing that could have ever happened, because all we got to do in terms of follow through to ensure a bullet hits our intended point of impact, where we are aiming the gun, is it takes about 0.02 of a second, right? From the time that trigger goes click and the gun goes bang, and that shot is initiated, it takes about 2 or 300ths of a second. That's all we need to keep that trigger right there and keep everything on target and keep, that's the level of follow through we need, is about 2 or 300ths of a second. And then it means nothing more beyond that as far as hitting that target. So even when we look at the idea of follow through, as it relates to the trigger, as soon as that bullet's left the muzzle, which really means as soon as we start seeing that slide coming back and we feel it in our hands, finger off the trigger, right? Reset that sucker. So that my goal is, by the time my sight or my eyes register that my sights have come back to the target, I already want to be at that prep point. And if we're shooting quickly, then we're not stopping at that prep point, right? With the trigger, we're just continuing right on through. But if we're taking precise shots, I'm already at that prep point. I'm already ready to go. All that's left to happen is for me to refine and confirm my sight picture, and away we go again. Anyway, It's really good stuff, and it's something that a lot of shooters struggle with. Again, with where I'm coming from today, that's already assumed that exists to an extent, skill wise. Although listening to your story, Jacob, if I was going to say, hey, bro, like here's the one thing you and I are going to work on and try to really help you with, it would be to get this very thing, this idea of trigger manipulation, to be as subconscious as possible, right? So that even with a deliberate trigger press or an accelerated trigger press, right? A target, a shot that requires some measure of trigger preparation versus one that you're just slamming through the trigger. We want that to be happening automatically, and we want that trigger reset to happen automatically. And I would say, bro, we got to get that in your subconscious because we don't want to be thinking about that. It's kind of like
At the same time, I know that grip would make a big difference too, because grip also impacts a bunch of other things. But I ran a drill this weekend where I really focused in my head. I was like, when I run a drill, I'm trying to perform. So I really mentally rehearse. I'm thinking in my head about all the things I want to do really well. And in my head, almost regardless of the drill, the things I always am thinking consciously that I want to do well, because these are things that are not yet subconscious skills, are get a real good grip, like hit that gun strong with the good hand, acquire really strong grip when I marry the hands, and then work the trigger well. Those are the things I'm mentally thinking about every time. So we ran this drill, and it's a casino drill, a variation of a casino drill. And so it come out of the holster, bang, 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 hit a reload, right? 7-round mags in a casino drill. So drop the mag, reload, come back up, decent grip, right? Pop off my next 7 shots, another reload, come back up on a target. And in this moment, of the next 7 shots, I threw 4 of them to the left, the first 4. And then I just compensated and adjusted, right? As I was trying to run that gun pretty fast. But it was like, crap. Like my trigger work did not improve, did not worsen over the course of that run. What happened was after the second reload, my grip did not go back to being as good as it had been in the first 2 volleys of fire. And so because of that, my trigger deficiency, which previously had been masked by a good grip, became apparent. Right. And so I have both the skills have to can be improved, and one can compensate for the other.
Yeah, and that's a common thing actually, just in general with shooters, that they will tend to relax a little bit the longer they go into a string of fire. So that comes into play, but also that reacquiring the grip after a reload, a very tricky, that's almost a specific skill in of itself, or something that a person can isolate, is the idea of, I'm going to perform a reload and reacquire the grip. You could turn that into a micro drill and work on that pretty hardcore by itself, because that is a thing. Again, I mean, we want to get you to where your grip is subconscious, that it just happens, that you don't think about it, or at the very least, like kind of the next step for you is to get to where, okay, as I'm thinking about things, as I'm doing a little prep, I'm going to initially maybe think about grip, but then once you've set that grip, you want to forget about it. That'd be kind of like the next step, and then getting to the next step beyond that is, you're never thinking about it because it just happens, right? And that's going to come with time. It's going to come with practice, with lots of repetitions. So the other thing too, and I think this is really relevant for those that are listening or viewing the podcast today, is that we really need to get into the mindset of thinking of grip and trigger manipulation as being a system, that they really work together. So I've heard you say about, my grip kind of compensated for lack of trigger manipulation skills, or vice versa. And that is true. But it really is a system, like they work together. And we ideally want trigger manipulation and grip to both get better where we can. Good stuff, brother. Like that's really good stuff to actually think about and kind of think through. And I know that stuff you're describing is where a lot of other shooters are at as well.
Well, and there's no advanced shooting, right? And so the difference between me doing those two things well, like consistent good grip and consistent good trigger work, and not consistent good grip and consistent good trigger work, is the difference maker right now between me. Like it's the 80-20, and I'm always looking for the 80-20 because I'm lazy and busy at the same time. Being lazy and busy is a horrible combination in life. I hope no one else has to deal with that combination of personality factors. And so, I'm always looking for, what's the thing I can do and put in 20% of the effort, and it will improve me 80% of the results. I did the ASP 10 round, whatever they call it. It's like their like measurement thing of skill, and it's some ridiculous formula. John or Neil or whoever, if you listen to this, please figure out a new way to calculate this. It's like add up all your times, divide by 5, add penalties, multiply times 12.4. Like it's something like I was explained 3 times how to calculate the score of this thing, and I'm like, screw it, like someone else figure this out. Anyway, it's basically it's out of 100. Like if you get 100, you're just the shiz diggity. And I got a 50 something. And on the line with me, I was probably, I don't know, I was in the group, right? It was kind of between 40 and about 60, and I got a 50 something. And the difference between me figuring that out, right, consistent grip and trigger work, was the difference between me scoring like a 50 something and a 70 something on that test. That's what it would have been, because my times were solid. I ran the gun pretty dang fast because I always go too fast. I always outshoot my skills. But my accuracy was the problem. And the accuracy, guess what? All my misses were to the left, right? So anyway, and I was seeing my sights, I might add, by the way. Like I was getting sight picture. So anyway, yep, that's for me. That's, cool. I know those are my things, and that's my 80-20. The thing I can put in 20% of the work, and I love being lazy, but I could increase my shooting skill by about 80%.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, make a commitment today, brother. Spend 15 minutes a day, dry fire.
No comment on that.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's really the key, when I could almost make this that one thing that's made all the difference for me as a shooter is just the fact that, and I'm not perfect in this, right? I talk about it, we preach it as far as doing daily dry fire, but life certainly does get in the way, right? Like right now, I haven't dry fired for a couple of days just because so much going on, with family and with work and staying here late, laying carpet on the new office floor. But I've got to, but I've already decided for myself today. I had that realization this morning. I'm like, man, I've got a big match coming up this weekend that I want to do well at, and I've let the dry fire go out the window. And I got to get back on that horse tonight. I've got a couple of days. I can, get a couple of good sessions in just to make sure that it's those little things for me, right? I want to make sure that draw is right on. I want to make sure my reloads are spot on. I want to make sure that I am doing all these things like you're talking about, including acquiring grip and performing reloads and reacquiring grip, and not having to think about it and not having to worry about it, and just knowing that it's going to be there. All that stuff comes because of consistent, regular, and frankly, daily is like the gold standard practice. And so, you know what? Yeah, I fall off the horse for a few days. Okay, today is the day to make a difference in that and get back on the horse and ride. Dry fire has been a huge benefit to me in upping my skill level. But that's not the one thing that I'm talking about in this episode today. Are you ready to get into this, Jacob?
I'm ready. What's your one thing?
I would say that the one thing for me is, and it's a little bit tricky to put this into one thing. But as I was just talking about with like grip and trigger manipulation being like a system, I would say that this is kind of that same sort of thing. It's sort of a system, an approach. And what I mean by that is it's a combination of vision a lot of it's vision, frankly. And so in other words, you've got to develop a certain acuity for what you see and what you perceive in your gun, in your sights, as you're shooting, as you're running your gun. And it's once you have that in place, it then allows you to use that vision as a tool. It allows you to take, because now what it is you're collecting that information that you're taking in visually, and now you're able to do something with it. So this is a bit probably deeper for some people, but it really shouldn't and doesn't have to be that deep of a concept or a skill set. So really what I'm getting at is that for a long time as a shooter, as a developing shooter, and I think I even got to where I was pretty good, but didn't really understand some of these things. And what I mean by that is, I'm going to throw out the concept of calling your shots, for instance, as an example. It's a part of this. It's a part of this system. I think for a while, I mean, I was calling shots, not consistently, not 100% of the time, but there's definitely those times I would recognize, I'm like, yep, I know where that one went. But I didn't really understand why I knew, it wasn't something that I was analyzing on a deeper level. And to some of you, that might not seem like a big deal. Like, well, why is that relevant? Or why is that important? Why would I need to call my shots? Maybe some of you are even asking, what is calling my shots? And I would simply respond with a very straightforward definition of calling shots is, where the bullet goes based on what you see and or also maybe feel in the gun. It's basically the feedback you get from the gun as the shot's fired, and most of it is probably visual, because the tactile piece is a lot more difficult to read. Okay, but calling shots is knowing where that bullet goes exactly at that moment that you fire the shot. That's what calling shots is, and I think that's a really valuable skill to have, because for a long time I wasted time, frankly, of just shooting rounds. And I would find myself in a position sometimes, Jacob, where I would maybe shoot a drill and think, that went pretty good. Yeah, that felt good. Like, I think I saw my sights, like sights on target. Yeah, okay. If sights are on target and I press the trigger good, then yeah, I know where, yeah, good job. And then you walk down range and look at your target, you're like, well, these 4 shots here are pretty good. That's what I expected. But these other 5 or 6 are not what I expected. Why is that? And that would sometimes trouble me a little bit. In fact, I even remember asking the question of somebody, and it had to do with calling shots. I remember kind of asking, like, why occasionally for me, it was more in a match environment, like shooting a USPSA stage. And so, like, you got paper targets, you have some steel targets mixed in. And let's just say I'd be burning it down on paper, right? Whack, 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 whack on all the paper. And then I'd go to a steel target and pull the trigger, and I'd already be transitioning back to another paper target or maybe to another steel target. But then realize, wait, that steel target didn't go down. I didn't hit that steel target. And it'd kind of be that little bit of an internal frustration of, why didn't I hit that steel? I thought I hit that steel. I thought I saw my sights on that steel target and I pressed trigger, but I didn't hit it. What the heck, right? Well, that was where I started having to answer the question by discovering a little bit better of what calling my shots meant. And there's definitely a difference between thinking your sights are where you think they are, meaning on target and you're pressing the trigger and whatnot. There's a difference between thinking that's where your round is going and knowing that's where your round is going. And that might be a little above, where some of you are at, or again, some of you are probably thinking, well, what is the relevance, Riley? And the relevance is, I want to know where my bullets are going. In a competition match, huge value. because I can push the speed even more in a competition because I know I either know I'm making my hits or I know I'm not making my hits. And if I know I'm not making my hits, then a quick follow-up shot to ensure I get my hits is very easy to do. It's faster than, so the example that I used a moment ago of transitioning over to a steel target and thinking I hit it, but by the time I've already transitioned off of it, I then realize maybe out of the peripheral vision that, wait, that target didn't go down. So then you lose time having to go back to it and hit it again. Whereas if in that moment I called my shot correctly and accurately and knew, yep, hit that. Or excuse me, let me back up. If I knew I missed it, but I'm still right there, it takes less time to go ahead and send another shot and make it up. Right. So knowing where your bullets go is a powerful thing. Talk about the defensive context now. Knowing where your bullets go on a human target, on a deadly threat, hugely valuable information to have. Okay. Because you don't get to check paper or holes in like you do in a paper target. You don't get to check your work on your bad guy. Did I hit him? Right? In the moment, you don't get to check that. Okay. So knowing based on the feedback I get from the gun, where those rounds go, extremely valuable in a defensive context. So I've gone down this path of, all right, I talked about vision a little bit, and then I started talking about calling shots. Well, let me get back to the vision piece. Let me explain now why I struggled with this a little bit. And I would say I had not quite yet figured out how important visual information is in the shooting context. Reading Brian Enos's book about practical shooting just changed my life as far as being a shooter. What has changed for me is that I've been able to see a lot more. Okay. So what I mean by that is there's a tendency when we shoot a gun to become tunnel visioned but we don't realize we're tunnel visioned, if that makes sense. Like tunnel vision in the classical sense would mean that like our peripheral vision gets darkened and thus we can't, it's like we're wearing blinders. And so the only thing we can see is what's directly ahead. But I'm talking about where the brain basically throws out all of this peripheral information and we get really sucked into certain things relating to the shooting of the gun. And sometimes we get sucked into certain things visually that aren't all that important to actually, to what we're actually doing. And so what I mean is I've started to try to really open up myself visually. So I am now where I'm at right now as a shooter is instead of being really locked in on target and sights and all in that relationship, that's still present, but I'm also seeing a lot more in my peripheral. I'm seeing other targets in the vicinity that I may need to transition to. I'm aware of them. I'm seeing my gun recoil. I'm seeing that slide come back and go forward. I'm seeing the brass eject out of the gun and fly over my shoulder. Like I'm taking all of that in and I'm aware of it. And it's that visual awareness that has started really switching me on in my shooting performance, because for us to get to that level of visual awareness, it means for us in terms of things like running our gun and calling our shots is that we can actually see that crap that we need to see that helps us call our shots. Meaning, for us to know where our bullets are going when we're shooting our gun requires a high level of visual awareness. I didn't quite have that figured out. Part of it is because I was way too tense as a shooter. So if you said a year ago, Jacob, Riley, step up, shoot a bill drill. You've seen me burn down bill drills a year ago, 2 years ago, even 3 years ago. But I was a very tense shooter. I was very like, okay, all right, yeah, sub 2 second. Here we go. All right. Okay, Jacob, we're ready. Beep. And I was tense, bro. I was like, ugh, like I'm going to draw this gun super quick. I'm going to put it up there on target, and I'm going to go wham, 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 wham 6 times. Like that was kind of my attitude with running my gun. Contrast with where I am today, I'm relaxed when I do that sort of thing, more often than not. The difference is that being relaxed has allowed me to be more visually aware. Being more visually aware has allowed me to take in more feedback from the gun. Taking in more feedback from the gun means I have a greater degree of accuracy and confidence in shooting the gun and knowing the result. Not when I see the round impact paper, but I know the result when my finger presses the trigger. So that I know I've been going for a minute now. But
I had my turn when you went offline.
What's that?
I said I had my turn when you went offline.
Right.
I'm trying to understand fully what you're saying, not only what you're saying, but also how to replicate it. Because I think that if I'm hearing you right, the one thing for you is increasing your ability to see everything that's happening, both at the micro and macro level, and that leads you to being able to call your shots. And that's your one thing. So the skill is this like visual acuity, and being able to, at quite the pace, I might add, see sights, see targets, see the recoil of the gun, see the brass, like the brass, being extracted and ejected, seeing other, peripherals of other targets and all that kind of thing. That's your one thing. What I'm not necessarily hearing from you is, how do I do that? And maybe the answer is practice that. Practice seeing stuff. Train the eyes by just trying to see more than you currently see, and doing that a lot. Maybe that's the answer here. Maybe it's not any more complex than that.
Yeah. So replicating it is, it's easier said than done for sure, right? It's one of those things, and it is a thing that you really kind of need to experience. And I didn't really have any one instructor that showed me or helped me see that and understand it. For me, is a lot of trial and error, and reading Brian Enos's book, and really analyzing and trying to visualize in my head from all the many thousands of rounds I'd fired, what do I actually see and what am I looking for? That's a challenging thing. Replicating it, though, can be done. And so let me kind of walk you through, and I just did this with a student in a class a couple weeks back. Rich. We had Rich as a student, and Rich got some nice one-on-one time with me. And with Rich, I was able to actually help him realize this. And I could see as soon as that light bulb turned on, everything in him switched. And so that's the moment I knew. I'm like, bro, you got it. I just, I led you to water and you were able to drink, and boom. So how we accomplished this with him is kind of like what I just described. And I actually, I did a couple of visual exercises with him. First of all, when we were sitting at lunch, just having a bite to eat, as I was sitting there, I said, okay, Rich, here's the deal. I'm looking at this one object, okay? And that's where my focus is. So the direction of my eyes, the alignment of my eyes is directly onto that object. And it's probably about 40 yards away. And I described that object to him. I just made it clear, that's my focus, right? I see it very well. I see it very clearly. I know exactly what it is. But now listen, I'm going to start describing to you other things I see, because we see 170 degrees, right? Laterally or horizontally. And we see about 120 degrees or so vertically. And here's the amazing thing about our eyes is every day, all day long, we take in that full 170 degree by 120 degrees or whatever, like full time, all the time. All that information is coming in. It's the brain that decides what to use and what to discard, right? And what to pay attention to, what to be aware of. And I'm not a scientist on this, at all. And it would be really interesting to get more into the science of this, but I'm just telling you, we see everything all the time. So I did this visual exercise with him, and I basically encouraged him to do the same thing. Focus on this one thing. Now start describing to me other things that you see in your peripheral vision, both your near periphery, with that's the stuff that's around that central focus area, and then also the wider periphery. Keep going out. Keep telling me more and more stuff. So that was kind of the first piece. The second piece was, now we're going to do that with a gun. So now you're going to look at the target, and he was running a red dot optic. And I saw the question from Jared pop up about switching to optics, and I'll maybe come back to that. But now we switched to the gun, and I told him, okay, so you're going to focus on this thing, and you're going to shoot, okay? And we did that, and I asked him what he saw, what he noticed. He described it to me. And then we started opening that up. I said, now I want you to shoot again, and I want you to describe something else, not the thing that you're focused on, because you already described that. Now start describing other things that you can see and be aware of while you fire that gun. He started doing that, and then I started giving him things. I said, this time I want you to try to see if you see the slide of the gun cycle as you fire this shot in your peripheral vision, right? Your focus is still on the target here, on this point or this circle or whatever it is you're trying to hit. But I want you to tell me if in your peripheral vision you can see this slide go chunk chunk. And it took like 2 or 3 tries, and he's like, oh, I saw the slide cycle. Okay, guess what? Now we're getting somewhere, because when we start picking up on that kind of thing, that starts relating it to me being able to track my sights. Iron sights or red dot, doesn't matter. I can start tracking my sights when I first start becoming aware of those things actually moving in front of my face as that shot's being fired. When we start picking up on that visual information, that starts leading us in the direction to being able to call shots and do so with a high degree of accuracy. And so kind of walking them through this sort of it was more of a visual exercise than it was a shooting exercise. And from there, there's a few other things. I'm leaving out some details mostly because of time. But we were able to get to where all of a sudden Rich could fire shots, and I'd be like, where'd that go? And he told me, he's like, that went low left, or that went straight left in like the C. It's close to the letter C in the C zone of a USPSA target, sort of thing, right? Yep, you're right. Well, that one went low left, kind of down where the corner of the A zone is on the, like that kind of thing. That's a powerful thing, and it changed his world because he had no idea that you could even do that. To Jared's question, whether switching to optics helps with this, I would say for me, it has. And when I tell people, I've used this terminology before, shooting a red dot optic on my pistol has helped me become a better iron sight shooter. And I would say the reason for that is because shooting a red dot has allowed me to open up my visual awareness, which now coming back to an iron sighted gun, now I understand a little bit better what I need to be seeing as I'm shooting a gun that has only iron sights on it, as opposed to getting really sucked into the sights and their relationship to the target.
Okay. That was actually extremely specific and helpful, whereas the first thing you said sounded cool but was not extremely helpful. So I'm hearing what you're saying. I guess.
Sorry, I was just saying, I see we have Steve Anderson watching, and I'm repping this shirt.
Oh, there you go.
And Steve has been immensely helpful in his podcast. That shooting show has been immensely helpful to me in together with these other pieces and bits and things I've picked up on through the years, like his stuff has helped me a lot in this. Absolutely. I got to give credit to Steve, the man, Anderson. And he says shot calling is 1,000 times easier with a dot. I agree with that. I think there's some shooters that are able to figure out shot calling with iron sights. But for me, again, like I said, I've become a better iron sight shooter and be able to call shots with iron sights better because I learned what I needed to be seeing better with a red dot. Absolutely.
So today's episode is sponsored by the Coolfire Trainer. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that and airsoft. I have here next to me my dry fire range bag. That's how lame and geeky I am, is that I have a dedicated range bag for dry fire. And I'd like to, and in here I have a Glock Gen 3 Glock 19 airsoft pistol. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, because I think that this visual acuity, certainly a person can probably increase it and train it and practice it without recoil, right, in dry fire. But if I I think seeing the gun cycle is an important part of this exercise, clearly, for obvious reasons. And so I want to know from you, especially during an ammo shortage like right now, what tools do you think help with this? Or how, yes, that. I think I stated my question clear enough.
So I will respond with a couple of things. First of all, in my eye was opened to this recently with Tim Herron being in his class, and he asked about doing a dead trigger drill. I didn't know what he meant by that, so I asked him to explain. And he talked about how we can do dry fire with a dead trigger, meaning like, say, take your Glock, for instance, Jacob, and you press the trigger once and you get a dead trigger. Well, you can still manipulate that finger. And let's just simulate a bill drill, right? So, all right, slam that trigger 6 times on your paper target or whatever that you've got up on your wall, and watch what the sights do as you do that. Okay. That can also that you can start picking up on some of these visual patterns that will be helpful to you in live fire from doing something like that, and just becoming aware of how your sights move as you're doing something like that. Now, back to today's episode sponsor, Coolfire Trainer. Here's one of the things I would say. I've done a lot of dry fire work in the last 6, 7, 8, 9 months that hasn't been with a cycling slide or even with a resetting trigger. And I think combining the right dry fire regimen together with live fire practice regularly can really work well together as a training system. But with ammo being the way it is and the cost like it is, I do think that, because there's those times like I'm still trying to do a lot of dry fire practice, but I'm not able to do as much live fire as what I'm once used to. And so I still find that I miss having a little bit of that live fire, experience. So more than ever, I think tools like Coolfire Trainer have a lot of value in today's world with the way the market is. So the thing is with Coolfire is that the recoil impulse is different. That's the best way to describe it. People want to know, well, is it like the same weight of recoil energy? Is it, does recoil, is it the same and all that kind of stuff? It's like, it's really hard to describe. The fact is the recoil impulse you get from a Coolfire Trainer is different. It's different in a lot of ways from a live fire. However, where I think there is some value is that you get a slide that moves, you get a sight that lifts, a dot that lifts up, or the front sight lifting out of your rear sight notch as you're firing the gun. Of course, in dry fire with the Coolfire, you get that experience and you get to test things like grip a little bit, right? And you get to start training that eye visually to pick up on patterns as that gun is cycling. And that is a really valuable thing. So I think that Coolfire Trainer can be a very valuable tool in learning how to see what you need to see visually, open yourself up to that, being able to pick up on details in that sight picture that you used to never, be able to see and notice. And that leads you in that path of being able to call your shots with great precision and accuracy. So yes, I think it's a great tool for that. Use it in moderation, like all things. As far as I could practice 100% live fire, and that's cool. But there's probably some things I'd miss out on that I could do in dry fire. And if I only ever do dry fire, I'm going to definitely miss out on some things in the live fire practice. Cool Fire Trainer allows us to get a little bit of that experience both at home and at the range.
What about my airsoft? Since
my
airsoft gun has an actual projectile, has a point of impact, different than say Cool Fire Trainer. Cool Fire Trainer just has a laser module, though I'll be the first one to admit that I rarely attach my laser module on my Cool Fire Trainer just because I find it very inconvenient to take it on, take it off, take it on, take it off to recharge it. So most of the time using my Cool Fire Trainer, I don't use my laser module. But my airsoft has a point of impact. Do you think that that's valuable?
Yeah. Okay. So, and again, in today's world, with ammo being the way it is, I think airsoft is an absolutely valuable tool that we can be using to supplement our training, because it allows us to get some of those same things that we would get in live fire, not on the same level or to the same degree, but allows us to get some of that experience at a low cost. And that's important in today's world. So yes. And again, with like an airsoft, I mean, the thing there is most of those airsoft pistols, the slide weight is very lightweight. Your recoil energy is quite low. It shoots flatter than a 22 does, probably, So yeah, I mean, you get some disruption in your sight picture as that thing cycles, and that's fine. It's still great practice, and it's still great. I think that you can absolutely practice things like shot calling even with an airsoft pistol. So yeah, I've got airsoft guns. I've got Cool Fire Trainer. I kind of spread the wealth with a lot of these tools. There's kind of like days where I'm like, you know what, today I'm going to do some practice with the airsoft out in the backyard. Cool. All right. Tomorrow I'm going to do dry fire only, like no cool fire, just straight up, just working on draws, working on presentation, picking up sights, transitions. I can do all that in straight up dry fire. Next day I might do some cool fire. I might mix the two into one session. So, and I'll tell you what I'm doing this week a little bit, but and I say a little bit just because I don't have a cool fire for my P320 competition gun yet. But I haven't been able to shoot as much lately as I would like. And so I've got a big match coming up this week, Area 1, and I don't want to show up not having really shot a lot of rounds. And so just to kind of remind my brain of like what that feels like before I show up at the match, all cold and stuff later this week, because I know I'm not going to make it to the range before I go. I'm going to run the Cool Fire Trainer with my Glock 19 just to get a few reps and just, again, to kind of remind the brain, like, this is what recoil feels like. It's cool. It's all good. Now you're going to go to the match. You're going to draw. You're going to hit. This one's for Steve. So you're going to center the dot and call the shot.
Awesome. I too try, I don't do nearly as much practice as you do, but when I do, I'm all over the tools. I go back and forth all the time. I definitely run my SIRT pistol more than anything else. And part of that's just convenience sake. I don't have to grab the air. I don't have to, change this out of this gun. In the case of airsoft, I don't have to get BBs and figure out a point of impact and, and a little trap. So I run the SIRT more than anything else for sure. But, I may or may not use it with LASR on one day. I may or may not, grab the Cool Fire Trainer and run it instead, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So unfortunately, I often find people asking us as a company or as individuals, and in fact, we had a comment earlier today when I was talking earlier, someone asked about, which do you recommend if a person can only buy one, the Cool Fire Trainer or a SIRT pistol? And I hate those questions because I'm sort of like, well, I use them all, man. And I think that's kind of hard, but it's also an unrealistic expectation, though probably right now it's not, since no one can spend their money on ammo. But under normal conditions, it's probably an unrealistic expectation to expect someone to go out and buy all of it at once. oh, you're a new shooter? Great. Go drop some money on a cool fire trainer, cert pistol, plus maybe an airsoft. Oh, and don't forget you probably need this. And, and it just starts to add up really fast. And especially when someone's new, they're probably not as committed to the skill. And so that can sometimes be a challenge, I think. But in an ideal world, you have all the tools and you use them for practicing different things.
Again, it seems to be a theme of this episode today. Because of ammunition availability and cost, I would if you have made up your mind that you are going to buy some kind of dry fire aid or tool, I would probably prioritize Cool Fire Trainer over anything else right now, because it gives you that one thing that you don't get with anything else. I can do anything that I need to dry fire practice wise with my live gun in a complete dry setting, right? Unloaded, just going through the reps, right? I can do anything I need to do. The one thing I don't get is that sight alignment disturbance from recoil. And then that's really what it is. I don't care about the recoil energy that comes into my hands. That's not really the big value for me of the Cool Fire Trainer. People say, well, I gotta, other than I did say that it's going to help me a little bit this week in my prep going to Area 1 and not being able to shoot immediately before this big match. But that's a secondary benefit. The bigger thing is getting practice with sight acquisition and tracking and transitions from target to target. That's immensely more valuable in my opinion. And it again it's something that the Cool Fire provides that almost nothing else does. So yeah, guys, now it sounds like a big, infomercial, advertorial, whatever, but go to concealedcarry.com/coolfire.
It's a commercial. I love it when it ends in a commercial. I'm pumped.
And that is where we would end the episode. We always, give one last shout out to the episode sponsors and stuff. And so that's sponsored today, Cool Fire Trainer. One last summary is, again, being able to relax myself, relax my vision and my mental processing, and just allowing myself to see and then run my gun in that now more all-seeing environment has changed everything for me as a shooter and is helping me achieve my performance goals that I have set for myself. And I would have never been able to get there if I continued to be as tense and intense as I have been for years as a shooter. So that's my parting words and where I'll leave it. And guys, there's a greater level of enlightenment out there if you have yet to have experienced it.
Yeah, I guess my summary thought would be that for years, I've always thought you were born with different eyes than me, despite me actually having good eyes and you having corrective vision, because you often say things like, we're on the range together, and you'll say something like, I shoot as fast as I can see the sights. And inside my head, I'm thinking, there's no human way you can see the sights that fast. I see your splits. And if I shoot that fast, I'm not seeing my sights. Right? You're shooting 0.115, 0.16, 0.17. I for one couldn't do that. But even if I could shoot 0.15s, and I don't think I've ever shot those kind of splits, but even at like 0.18s, 0.19s for me, I'm not getting a sight picture. Not in traditionally, and maybe that's improving some. But you'll say things like that, and I think to myself, well, sounds good, but I don't know how you're doing it. Right? I don't know how you're seeing that fast. And so talking through this has been very valuable to add the context to some of these things that we say all the time, like shoot as fast as you can see the sights, or let the sights be your gas pedal, or any of these things that we commonly say and that you often repeat. I think that the context is, well, that there's a skill associated with being able to see it.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you're choosing to end kind of with those words. I know I said I was done, but if there is a secret, you know how we always say like there's no like secret sauce to shooting a gun well, you know, or that kind of thing. If there is a secret sauce, it's kind of this thing that separates you and me, that like what you're talking about right here, because people always want to know, well, how can I get faster and more accurate, or at least maintain accuracy as I get faster? And this is really what it is. It's all about seeing your sights sooner or faster. Like it's all about seeing that and knowing what you see earlier in the shooting process. That's what allows you to go faster and maintain accuracy, or at least acceptable standards of accuracy. That's really the secret sauce. So how do you do that? You got to expose the eye, really the brain. It's the brain. It's the brain that's slow to catch up to these things. We have to expose the brain to be able to start picking up patterns and recognizing what's happening. When the brain catches up to all of that that's happening and taking place, that's then what allows us to understand that visual information better and then see the sight picture sooner. That's the secret.
Okay.
That's all I got. Guys, it's probably been a little bit longer episode than I intended. But appreciate all you for sticking around for it and all your comments too. And I'm going to go back in here and respond to some of you directly in the comments that I was not able to address live on the show, just because of either being focused and in the moment or not having time to address some of those questions that you guys are bringing up. Really good stuff, by the way. And I appreciate you, Jacob, for humoring me and saying, yep, this is a interesting subject to do on the podcast. Let's do it. I've enjoyed talking about it, and I hope that somebody somewhere out there listening has gotten something out of it. Like if one person sends me an email or sends us an email, if you email podcast@concealedcarry.com, Jacob sees it, I see it, Matthew, our producer, sees it. If one person emails me and says, what you guys talked about in this episode made something click for me, and that makes a difference for you in your shooting, then my work here is done. And so with that, I guess we better say sayonara. So thanks so much for listening to this episode today, guys. Again, one last shout out to the episode sponsor, Coolfire Trainer. Can be found at concealedcarry.com/coolfire. And I hope you might consider picking one up today. With that, you know the phrase. We're going to leave you with a reminder to train right, train often, and train safe so you can fight hard, fight fast, and fight true. Take care.